Boy, have the police got this one wrong in so many different ways. It's really disappointing because it really makes them look bad. It damages public confidence and it damages the reputation and ultimately the confidence in them doing their duty going forward. So what am I talking about? And I'm talking about Essex Police and this whole situation with the Asylum Hotel, whereby there were protesters outside the Asylum Hotel, obviously protesting against the asylum seekers being housed there. And the counter-protesters, this group called Stand Up to Racism, who initially it was claimed that the police were escorting these protesters towards the hotel. And they denied it initially, but when shown footage, as in the police denied it, but then when shown footage, they backtracked and it showed that the police officers were in fact escorting these protesters toward that hotel. Obviously, then a clash occurred and violence ensued and they made 10 arrests. Now, this is really disappointing. Now, many of you have watched my channel for a long time now. You'll know that I am not quick to criticize the police. In fact, I defend the police whenever possible because I say they've got a difficult job to do. It's a job that lots of people don't want to do. They are sort of damned either way. You know, if they do act, they are scrutinized for it. If they don't act, they are questioned as to why they didn't act. So there are two sides of looking at this, but ultimately it's disappointing in that they initially denied that they did this at all, and then they backtracked and said they did. And then we get the chief constable making a press conference about it and ultimately really refusing to properly answer any of the questions. And so I'll deal with that again in a minute as well. And so first of all, I will also cover the law. But if you like this approach to these kind of things, please do subscribe to the channel. Let's head towards 1 million subscribers, and I'll be really grateful for that. If you want my personal views, I reserve those for my off-the-record channel, BlackBeltBarrister Off the Record, linked below. Please do subscribe there as well. So GB News now saying they didn't get an answer. So they asked questions to Ben Julian Harrington, Chief Constable of Essex Police, about this, but didn't get any real answers. So I will address this first because this is probably the most disappointing thing. With great respect to him, this is the most disappointing thing because this is a press conference. It's designed to answer the questions of the general public asked by members of the press to get clarification on exactly what happened here. So jumping straight to it, I'll link this below. You can watch the full thing. It's about 5 minutes long, but this is the one snippet where he's ultimately refused to answer the questions. Listen to this and I'll let you on know what I think.
It's not for me to comment and to try and criticise or indeed to examine that operation.
So that's in response to taking the protesters, essentially, or escorting those protesters or counter-protesters toward the hotel to the other protesters. And now he said, it's not for me to comment, criticise or examine those decisions and what happened. Well, with great respect, yes, it is. If you are the chief constable of the police, then it absolutely is your job to question, comment, criticise, examine, look into what happened, follow things through. If things didn't happen the way you wanted them to, make sure that doesn't happen again, or at least tell the press, yes, we cocked that up, we got that wrong, we shouldn't have done that, we shouldn't have done this. Now, what they say is that they have a duty to facilitate lawful protest. Now, to an extent, that is true. But in my view, that does not extend to escorting who they might reasonably believe are going to cause this clash when they arrive. So if they knew, and they did know, or they should have known because it was on video, if I bring up this one here from Adam Brooks here, this video, you can see in the back sort of third along here, the one in the light top here, is, if I zoom in, you might be able to see this a little bit clearer. One second. If I zoom in, you'll see a little bit clearer. This guy here in the sort of brownish beige top makes a gun signal. Now, bearing in mind they're being escorted by the police here, makes a hand gesture with a gun. Watch this. There. You can see the hand gesture. Over here, look. Now, some of them were masked, as you can see. Now, no one is going to convince me in 1,000 years that these police officers didn't know that half of these people are masked up And if they were observing the crowd, which they absolutely should have been, if they were escorting them or walking alongside them, whatever they want to call it, if they were walking alongside them towards another crowd, they absolutely should have been very mindful of what this crowd were doing. And this guy here was making this hand gesture with a gun. Look, more than once and twice, 3 times. So 4 or 5 seconds making this hand gesture as a gun, presumably towards the other protesters or someone on the other side of the road. Absolutely unacceptable. The police should there and then have known that it was reasonably foreseeable that there was going to be some semblance of violence or clash or whatever going on. Because that in itself is a provocative behavior. It's indicative of violence that might ensue, not necessarily by them, but it might incite others. A hand gesture is capable of inciting others to violence and so on. Now, whilst there is, as the Chief Constable said, there is a right to the freedom of assembly and peaceful protest and so on. That is under Article 11 ECHR. Now, even without ECHR, because there are talks about getting rid of ECHR, which would relieve us a lot of burden in this country, but even without that, we still have the general standing principle that we are free to do what we wish as long as there's no law curtailing that freedom. We supposedly live in a freedom-based society. You are free to do anything you like as long as there's no law against it. You know, you are free to defame somebody, but you're not free from the consequences of defamation. You know, you are free to say what you wish, but if it crosses the bounds of the criminal threshold, you might be prosecuted for public order, malicious communications, and inciting violence and so on. All of which is wrong. But the peaceful protest, that is allowed. Now, Article 11 provides for the right to the freedom of peaceful assembly, including protests and so on. Now, the police have various powers under the Public Order Act, under the Police Act, under the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act of 2014. If you are suspected of antisocial behaviour, you are required to give your name and address and so on, and it's an offence not to do so. Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994. We've got various different bits of law, the latter of which I just mentioned includes the power for police to require the removal of face coverings if they're being used to conceal identities for criminal purposes. For example, they might have reasonably suspected that some of these protesters might have been up to no good and therefore covering their face to conceal their identity if they then ensued in violence, which some of them did. Some of either side were then arrested. They made 10 arrests. Now, the police claim that this was their duty to facilitate this by presumably escorting them along peacefully. Now, in my view, with great respect, the police decision to quote-unquote escort counter-protesters to that location with a known risk or reasonably foreseeable risk of violence ensuing with what we've seen before, then especially after previous clashes, there appears to me here to be a conflict with the police duty to prevent disorder under the Public Order Act and under common law and the police statutory powers with which to enforce common law. The likelihood and the foreseeability of clashes in these circumstances, coupled with the police initial denial, which is all very questionable, that always, as a lawyer, that always says to me, why are they denying it? They either didn't know, or they knew and decided not to say so, or they knew and decided to obfuscate and twist and bend the truth so it didn't look quite so bad. But when video footage came out about it, clearly showing that they were walking these counter-protesters towards the protest, clearly that's an escort, however you want to see it. So for me, that contradicts and conflicts with their duty to prevent any kind of disorder from happening. Now, escorting them directly to the site rather than managing the protests separately and keeping them apart doesn't align with this basic principle of public order and preventing public disorder. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the police saying, yes, they are entitled to the freedom of assembly and protest and so on. That goes for both groups, so long as they're within the bounds of the law and not resorting to violence, which is obviously wrong. Providing they do that, they could keep them separate. And knowing that they were walking in that direction, they could absolutely 100% without any doubt, they could have kept them separate and maintained their right to the freedom of assembly. But the police could exercise their statutory powers under all of the relevant legislation to prevent the likelihood of disorder by keeping them apart. This is very disappointing that they didn't do that and that violence ensued and they had to resort to arrests. This is bad for the public, it's bad for the police, it is bad for the general morale of the country, and when they denied that this was happening until they were shown footage of it and then tried to backtrack and explain it away, that is really poor. Sella Bravman has commented on this and said two-tier policing at its finest. People are right to be angry about the immigration crisis, but when the police are part of the problem, she says, it's no wonder we've lost confidence. Because if the police are taking the counter-protesters who are pro-migration and anti-racism or whatever, they're escorting them by all accounts to the hotel, to the protesters that are currently protesting there. That is the very definition of two-tier policing. And then the video with the police vans or buses that they've been referred to, when they've been filmed putting people on those, at first I think it was believed that they were going to the hotel. I think everyone believed that. I think Nigel Farage put a video out to say that they were being taken to the hotel. I think it transpires that they were taken away from there. I'm not 100% certain because I've been looking around at different bits of footage on this. I think they were being taken away. But even then, that's still two-tier policing. If they're taking one lot of protesters away and not the other group, then again, they are treating that group differently. They are walking them there and they are busing them away. It's not just a couple of days since the police have essentially been told off by the High Court to say that they shouldn't be taking sides. In that case, they shouldn't be participating in the Pride parade. They shouldn't be wearing Pride stuff. They shouldn't be seen to be part of the parade. They can't objectively and neutrally police an event if they're part of the event. And so in this case, the public can reasonably infer that the police are doing exactly the same thing. They're walking with the counter-protesters towards that hotel. The public can then reasonably infer that they are walking with and therefore part of the counter-protesters, walking towards the hotel, walking towards those who are in protest already. If they are already there in situ, it is reasonably foreseeable that violence might ensue if they take counter-protesters who are all masked up, as you can see from the Sun article here, I'll link below. They're all masked up here to conceal their identity. One of them was making the hand gestures of a gun. Now, if they are masked up and concealing their identity like this, that at the very least should raise alarm bells. Most of the people in this picture you can see here are concealing their identity. There's only one reason for that. They don't want to be identified because if anything happens, they want to be able to make it away without being charged with any criminal offence. That is how it appears to me. So when it comes back to the Chief Constable, I will say in his defence that it is very difficult for him to answer questions when obviously there's things that may not have gone properly. I don't know, and I'm not saying that it was under his direction that they did that and that's the way they did that. If I'm being completely honest, it seems to me that he doesn't really agree with it because he said, well, it's not for me to comment and criticise and examine what happened there. To me, that's almost like code for, yeah, that was a bit of a cock-up, but I can't really say that because if I say that, then it makes me look bad because it's my force and my head should roll for it. I don't think that's fair either, but I do think that he should take the responsibility and say, yes, that shouldn't have happened. In my view, that shouldn't have happened. That is his place to say. He's the Chief Constable. And as the news and the media are asking, if not him to answer these questions, then who? Because by all means, ask me. If you ask me, I think that they shouldn't have done that. They should have kept them separate. They should not have walked alongside them, escorting them toward the hotel, knowing, at least reasonably foreseeing that violence could ensue. They should have kept them apart. It's common sense. It's absolutely logical. They shouldn't have done that. And if I were the Chief Constable and I found out that that's what happened, I'd be like, well, that's kind of really bad. And I would have said, yes, I think that should not have happened. I'll make sure that doesn't happen again. I'll have a word with all the officers, all the commanders, everything else, and I'll make sure that doesn't happen again. That, of course, if that's what he thinks. I don't know what he thinks. I don't know whether he disagrees with the way that it happened or not. But as it is, we don't really know because he didn't really answer the question. He said, it's not my place to comment, criticise or examine what happened. And with great respect, it is. Because if not him, then it must fall to somebody else. Then it must go all the way up to Parliament and the Justice Secretary, if not him, because somebody has to answer for the way this was handled. And in my view, it was absolutely avoidable in every respect. Let me know your thoughts and comments in the box below, politely, respectfully, without inciting any kind of violence or anything else, you understand, because your comments are your comments and you'll be held liable for them. So please do subscribe to the channel if you like this brutally honest approach to the law as it applies. I've told you before, I'll tell you what I think. I don't easily or quickly criticize the police, but I will do so if I think they've done something that I disagree with. I'll give you my alternative views on it. Yes, the police are there to maintain order and prevent disorder and so on. But in this case, I think they made it worse. Just my view. Let me know what you think. Please do subscribe, and I'll see you next time.